Heal your relationship with alcohol. James Bond drinks at clinically dangerous levels. A study published in the British Medical Journal calculated that across Ian Fleming's 14 original novels, Bond consumes the equivalent of 92 units of alcohol per week. That's more than 4 times what physicians classify as high-risk drinking. 4 times. And yet, that same night, while he sips his shaken, not stirred martini, he drives an Aston Martin at 200 kilometers per hour through the narrow streets of Monaco, shoots a villain with surgical precision, decodes a global conspiracy, and ends the evening with a woman who would intimidate most men sober. Everyone has watched that scene 100 times. A real person at half that consumption could not turn the ignition key without crashing the car, could not aim the gun with any reliability, could not hold a coherent conversation with the woman, let alone whatever came after. But film has shown you for 60 years a physiologically impossible image, on repeat, until your brain quietly accepted it as truth. And without noticing, you began to believe things, that alcohol makes a man interesting, that the glass is the accessory of the sophisticated, that without the beer there is no way to unwind at the end of a long day. That celebration requires a toast, that grief requires whiskey, that friendship rests on a cold beer at the table, that the romantic dinner needs wine, that deep conversation runs more freely with something in the hand. None of that is true. All of it is constructed. All of it was paid for over decades by an industry that moves $1.5 trillion a year and whose 50% of revenue comes from the 10% of drinkers who can no longer stop. This may be the first time anyone has framed it for you that way. The culture does not want you to know because knowing changes the question, and the question is everything. Before we go further, I want to be honest with you about one thing. What you are about to hear is not medical advice. It is not psychiatric advice. It is not therapy. It is an invitation to think. If you have been drinking daily and heavily for years, do not stop suddenly without first speaking to a physician. Unmanaged withdrawal can be dangerous. If what is happening to you is serious, find a professional. What follows is a map. It is not a substitute for the territory. And with that said, let us begin. Think for a moment about how we are bombarded. When you watch an important football match, the players on the field have spent months in preseason. Their diet is supervised to the gram, their sleep is protected, their alcohol intake during the season is absolutely forbidden. Their performance depends precisely on that abstinence. And you, while you watch them sprint at 35 kilometers per hour with the ball glued to their feet, see the sponsoring beer brand in every replay, every introduction, every moment of peak attention. That company pays hundreds of millions of dollars per season for its name to live there, attached to that euphoria. They know exactly what they're doing. Your brain is building a connection. The emotion of the match, without your consent, becomes welded to a brand of beer. The athlete does not drink. You drink. That is the transaction. The same arrangement plays out at the World Cup, at the Super Bowl, which concentrates more beer advertising per minute than any other hour on American television. At the Olympic Games, supposed pinnacle of the human body, sponsored by Coca-Cola since 1928, in a symbolic contradiction so deep it is almost never named out loud. The spectacles of human excellence are financed by products that destroy the very possibility of excellence. But this goes far beyond sport. Once you begin to notice alcohol on screen, you cannot stop noticing it. Watch the next romantic film you see. There will be a wine dinner as a climactic moment. Watch the next scene of male friendship. There will be a cold beer at the table. Watch the next scene of a successful professional woman processing her life. There will be a glass of white wine. Watch the next scene of a detective facing an impossible case. The desk drawer will open and the bottle will come out. Watch the next scene of a man alone, contemplating his life by the window late at night. There will be whiskey in a lowball glass. Watch the next scene of grief. Someone will pour something strong, immediately. Each of those moments taken on its own is trivial. Stacked across thousands of hours of exposure throughout a lifetime, they build your entire belief system about alcohol. The substance becomes associated with celebration, intimacy, sophistication, relief, masculinity, femininity, connection, contemplation, with every important human emotion. That universal association is not natural. It is the result of marketing decisions repeated over generations, paid for by an industry with a specific financial interest in keeping you believing what you believe. The average child in any urban environment before turning 12 has seen thousands of images of alcohol, ads while watching football with their father, adult characters drinking in every film and series they consume, even in some directed at families. Adults in their own household drinking at birthdays, holidays, weddings, funerals, Sunday gatherings. By the time that child is 15 and tries the first beer, their brain has been programmed for a decade to associate alcohol with everything the culture considers valuable. The first drink is never really the first. It is the culmination of an exposure program that began in the cradle. When you believe you need a drink after work, that thought is not entirely yours. Thousands of characters on thousands of screens taught it to you over decades. When you believe celebration requires a toast, that belief is not entirely yours. You learned it at every filmed wedding you watched as a child. When you believe that deep conversation with a friend goes better with a drink in hand, that idea is not entirely yours. The culture built it on top of your psyche before you had the capacity to evaluate it. This is not an excuse for anything. You are still responsible for your choices. But knowing where your beliefs come from allows you to examine them. A belief that came from outside, sold by an industry with specific interests, can be revised. A belief assumed to be natural and your own cannot. When you watch a meaningful football match and the desire for a beer arrives automatically, that association is not natural. It was constructed with billions of dollars of sustained advertising over half a century. Once you have seen the machinery, it does not switch off easily. Now let me ask you something. What is alcohol really? Not the cultural answer, the chemical, biological, neurological answer. Alcohol is a solvent. That is the first thing worth remembering. If you place pure alcohol on living tissue, it dehydrates it, damages it, destroys it. That is why we use it as antiseptic, as fuel, as preservative. The reason it does not dissolve us when we drink it is that the body dilutes it massively with water. And even so, it causes damage in every organ it passes through. The alcohol we drink is ethanol, a small molecule that crosses every membrane in the body with ease because it is soluble in both water and fat. That means it reaches everywhere. The brain, the liver, the stomach, the kidneys, the heart, the reproductive organs, the developing fetus if there is a pregnancy. There is no tissue in the human body that ethanol does not touch when it is consumed. In the brain, it does several things at once. It increases the activity of GABA receptors, the inhibitors of the nervous system. That is why at first you feel relaxation, ease, calm. It reduces the activity of NMDA receptors, the excitatory ones. That is why you lose coordination, judgment, memory. And it releases dopamine in the reward system, the same circuits activated by cocaine, sugar, sex, gambling. That is why a first drink feels good. But the brain does not stop there. The brain is a system that seeks balance. When a substance activates GABA receptors repeatedly, the brain responds by reducing their sensitivity and increasing NMDA receptors. When a substance floods the dopamine system, the brain responds by reducing the number and sensitivity of dopamine receptors. This is called tolerance. And tolerance is the first biological trap of alcohol. Because when tolerance is established, two things happen. The first, you need more to feel the same. The second, more insidious, is that without alcohol, you feel worse than you felt before you ever started drinking. The brain that has adapted to alcohol when there is no alcohol sits in a state of hyperactivation. Low-grade anxiety, fragmented sleep, irritability. The drink you take in the evening no longer carries you up. It returns you to baseline. And that baseline without the drink is no longer the zero of the healthy person. It is 15 below zero. The drink that seems to give you something is in fact returning to you what the previous drink took. This is what Anna Lemke in her book Dopamine Nation calls the principle of balance. For every prolonged pleasure the brain experiences, there is an equivalent compensation of discomfort. The chronic drinker is not drinking for pleasure. They are drinking to escape the discomfort produced by yesterday's drink. This is the exact trap that Alan Carr describes with such precision in his book on alcohol. The drink seems to resolve a discomfort that the previous drink actually created. It is the same mechanism that keeps a smoker lighting cigarettes one after another. Each cigarette relieves the sensation the previous cigarette produced, and the person believes they smoke because they enjoy it, when in reality they smoke because not smoking feels wrong. Carr puts it this way: alcohol is not a solution to a problem. Alcohol is the creation of the problem it pretends to solve. I want you to understand this in its most concrete form, because it happens to almost every weekend drinker without anyone naming it. Look at what happens across an ordinary week. Friday and Saturday night you drink. Your reward system floods with dopamine. The brain, seeking balance, responds by pulling back dopamine receptors, reducing sensitivity. Sunday you wake with a heavy head, with a flat mood, with an emptiness you cannot quite name. People call it the hangover, but the classic hangover with the headache is only the visible surface. What is really happening inside is that your dopamine system is on the floor. That is why Sunday feels great even if you did not drink to excess. It is not the dehydration that weighs heaviest. It is that the source of pleasure, dopamine, is temporarily exhausted. Monday and Tuesday you move through the days with little background joy. Things you usually enjoy do not move you the same. The music sounds slightly less alive. The conversation with your partner feels a little more mechanical. Food tastes like food, but not like pleasure. You don't know this is happening because you assume it's stress, the heavy Monday, the lack of sleep. But it isn't. It's your brain recalibrating the dopamine receptors that the weekend saturated. By Wednesday and Thursday, the system begins to recover. Receptors regain sensitivity. Mood lifts. Endogenous pleasure slowly returns. And precisely when you were about to reach a natural state of well-being, precisely when the brain was about to feel small things with intensity again, Friday arrives. And you drink. And the whole cycle starts over. Here is the point that changes everything. The weekend drinker never, not even once, gets to know what their own brain feels like when it is functioning well. They live oscillating between two states, the prolonged low of the first half of the week and the brief relief of Friday night that feels like happiness, but is only a temporary return to something close to zero. What they call weekend happiness is, in fact, relief from the chemical depression they inflicted on themselves 3 days earlier. And here is the trap, complete. Because they never reach the real baseline, they assume that baseline does not exist. They assume that life without alcohol is the muted life they feel Monday through Thursday. They assume the alcohol is what gives color to the week, when in reality, the alcohol is what is draining color from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday. 5 days out of every 7, the alcohol is collecting. 2 days out of every 7, the alcohol appears to be giving. When someone stops drinking for 3 or 4 consecutive weeks, they almost always report the same thing with surprise. I have never felt this level of background well-being in my life. It isn't euphoria, it is that for the first time in years, the brain is operating at the dopamine sensitivity it was designed for, without the chronic chemical depression that the weekend cycle imposed. Small things feel good again. A walk, a coffee, a conversation, a glance, all of it regains color. Not because reality changed, because the observer changed. That is one of the most important conceptual turns you will hear in this entire narration. Stop for a moment and test it against your own experience. That second drink you pour on Wednesdays, is it really because you enjoy the taste? Or is it because without it, the evening would feel strange, empty, incomplete? If it is the second, you are not choosing pleasure. You are managing a discomfort that alcohol taught you to feel. There is a question people ask often with an answer most don't know. Can you lose your tolerance to alcohol? Yes, and much faster than most imagine. After 2 weeks of not drinking, functional tolerance begins to return. A drink that previously barely registered now lands. After 1 month, metabolic tolerance drops noticeably. The liver processes more slowly. After 3 months, sensitivity has returned almost to the level of an occasional drinker. After a year, you respond to alcohol essentially like someone who never drank in excess. This has a critical implication. If after months of not drinking, someone relapses and drinks the way they used to, they can experience severe intoxication. The dose the body was once accustomed to can now become toxic. That is why relapses after long periods of sobriety are particularly dangerous. The loss of tolerance is subjectively protective. You feel you cannot handle it anymore, but biologically dangerous if the decision to relapse has already been made. And the next question is the one that carries the most hope. Does the brain recover if you stop drinking? Yes, substantially, and much faster than was believed 20 years ago. The human brain has a remarkable capacity for neuroplasticity. The regions most affected by chronic consumption, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the cerebellum, are also the regions that recover most thoroughly with abstinence. The first 72 hours are the peak of withdrawal. If there is physical dependence, this is the moment of highest risk, which is precisely why supervised care matters if you have been drinking heavily for years. After a week, REM sleep, which alcohol had been fragmenting, begins to normalize. Deep sleep increases. Systemic inflammation drops. After 2 to 4 weeks, executive function, attention, impulse control all show measurable improvement. Blood pressure drops. Resting heart rate decreases. By the end of the first 3 months, the hippocampus begins to regain volume. Brain imaging studies have measured this increase in people 3 months sober. Memory consolidates more reliably. At 6 months, the prefrontal cortex continues its recovery. Decision-making, long-term planning, emotional regulation all reach near normal levels. And something remarkable happens. Dopamine sensitivity is restored, which means small things, a coffee, a walk, a conversation, return to producing the pleasure they once produced. What alcohol had been stealing, the brain reclaims on its own. By the 1-year mark, many cognitive markers have fully normalized in people without structural damage. Studies show significant improvement in tests of working memory, processing speed, even general intelligence. At 5 to 7 years, the risk of cardiovascular mortality approaches that of people who never drank to excess, assuming no irreversible damage occurred. The brain that became addicted to alcohol is not broken. It is adapted to a toxic situation. Once the toxicity is removed, it returns toward its original form with remarkable efficiency. Neuroplasticity is not optional. It is what the brain does by default when conditions change. This matters because it changes the question. If the damage were irreversible, quitting alcohol would be a resigned loss. But the damage is largely reversible, which makes quitting an act of recovery. You are not surrendering something that was yours. You are reclaiming something that had been on loan and that alcohol was slowly demanding back. There is an experiment that changes how you see all of this. It comes from the classic alcohol psychology studies of the 1970s, and it deserves to be known because it disarms a large part of the belief system that sustains drinking. The experiment is called the balanced placebo design. Participants are split into 4 groups. The first is given alcohol and told they're receiving alcohol. The second is given alcohol and told they're receiving a placebo. The third is given a placebo, a drink without alcohol but with a convincing taste, and told they're receiving alcohol. The fourth is given a placebo and told they're receiving a placebo. And then they measure what happens. The results, replicated many times, are unsettling for anyone hearing them for the first time. People who believed they had received alcohol showed greater sexual disinhibition, greater aggression, greater sociability, greater conversational ease, even when in reality they had received a placebo. People who did not believe they had received alcohol showed less disinhibition even when they had actually received alcohol. Stop there for a moment. The sociability you feel in a bar, the looseness you feel at a party, the social anxiety relief that seems to come from the first drink, much of it, in good measure, does not come from the alcohol. It comes from the belief that you drank alcohol. It is expectation, not chemistry. This is one of the most important doors into reconstructing your relationship with the substance. Because if the sociability, the ease, the calm are products of belief, then they can be produced without the substance. The alcohol-free beer you order at a dinner, served in an elegant glass, with the full ritual, can deliver you a substantial portion of what alcohol seemed to deliver, without the cost. Try it, not as theoretical exercise. Try it at your next dinner. Order the zero alcohol beer, ask for the sparkling water with lime in a wine glass, request the alcohol-free cocktail with the full ritual, and observe honestly what you feel. If you feel the same or nearly the same, a core piece of your belief system has just been examined. If you feel notably worse, it is worth asking yourself why. What is it specifically about the ethanol molecule that you believe you need? Almost always, the honest answer is very little. The pleasure was in the belief, in the ritual, in the belonging, in the expectation. The molecule contributed far less than it seemed. I want to pause here and tell you something almost no one says with honesty. The deepest question a drinker can ask, the one most people avoid, is this: what am I escaping from? The escape is not always from something dramatic. For many people, what alcohol facilitates an escape from is silence. From being alone with oneself without noise, from the dull routine, the feeling that it's Tuesday again, from social discomfort, from having to be oneself without lubricant, from difficult emotions, sadness, anxiety, loneliness, frustration, from the inner critic, the voice that evaluates, from fear of the future, from questions without answers, from memory, from things in the past one does not want to touch, from the limited identity, the sense that real life is narrower than the life that should be possible. And sometimes, paradoxically, what alcohol helps escape from is presence itself. Being fully present in this moment can be unbearable. Pascal understood this in the 17th century. He wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Alcohol is one of the most effective methods of not sitting quietly. Even when you are physically on the couch, alcohol creates inner noise, a small modification of consciousness, a quiet exit from the room. What sobriety offers is not the absence of the escape. It is the capacity to no longer need it. When you learn to be in the room without fleeing, the room stops being a prison and becomes a refuge. The difficult emotions once permitted to arrive and pass stop terrifying. The inner critic, once spoken to with compassion instead of dread, becomes an ally. The silence once inhabited becomes precious. And here a deeper truth enters that changes the entire frame. Addiction is rarely really about the substance. Gabor Mate, in his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, puts it with a clarity worth hearing. The right question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. We do not look at the addict and ask what is wrong with them. We look at their history and ask what happened to them. Alcohol, drugs, compulsive gambling, repeated toxic relationships, all of them are strategies for managing pain. Imperfect, costly, self-destructive strategies, but strategies. If you are drinking more than you would like, it is not because you are weak of character. It is because somewhere inside you there is something that hurts enough that the drink has become the most accessible solution. That is important information. It does not make you defective, it makes you human. And it points to the real path of change. Not attacking the drink directly, but going to find the pain the drink is trying to manage. That is serious work. Work that almost always requires professional help. A competent therapist who understands addiction and trauma is worth infinitely more than any book, this one included. If part of you recognizes what I just said, that part is asking for something. Consider listening. There is a moment in almost any process of examining one's drinking when the question of self-diagnosis appears. Do I have a problem? Am I an alcoholic? Am I drinking too much, or is everything fine? Pop culture has simplified that question into something useless. It tells you the alcoholic is the one living under a bridge, the one who cannot hold a job, the one who lost the family. Since you are none of those things, you must be fine. That logic is false and dangerously convenient. The reality is that problematic drinking is a spectrum, not a binary category. There are three tools, validated by decades of clinical research, that can help you place yourself on that spectrum with honesty. They are not diagnoses, they are signals to bring to a professional, not verdicts. The first is called CAGE. 4 questions, 2 minutes. Have you ever felt you should cut down on your drinking? Have you been annoyed when people criticize your drinking? Have you felt guilty about your drinking? Have you ever had a drink in the morning to steady your nerves or get rid of a hangover? If you answered yes to 2 or more of those questions, there is a high probability of a problem with alcohol. The fourth question, the one about the morning drink, is particularly diagnostic. Drinking to settle the nerves or shake off a hangover in the morning almost always indicates established physical dependence. The second tool, more complete, is called audit. It was developed by the World Health Organization. 10 questions covering quantity, frequency, and consequences. It is freely available online in any language. 15 honest minutes with yourself answering them gives you a clear quantitative map. Below 8 points, low risk. Between 8 and 15, elevated risk, worth reflecting and reducing. Between 16 and 19, high risk, professional advice recommended. 20 or more, specialized clinical evaluation warranted. And the third is the DSM-5 criteria for alcohol use disorder. 11 criteria. If in the last 12 months you have experienced 2 or more, you technically meet the diagnosis. Drinking more or longer than intended. Wanting to cut back and failing. Spending significant time drinking or recovering. Intense craving. Drinking affecting work, school, home. Continuing to drink despite social problems. Cutting back on important activities because of drinking. Drinking in physically dangerous situations. Continuing despite physical or psychological problems. Tolerance. Withdrawal symptoms. But more important than any formal test, there are 3 questions a good therapist asks in a first session, and that you can ask yourself right now with honesty. The first: if you knew with certainty that you would drink for the rest of your life exactly as you do now, no more, no less, would you be comfortable with that idea? If the answer is no, you already know something important. The second: is there anyone in your life whose opinion you respect who has expressed concern about your drinking, even subtly? The external clues usually arrive before the internal ones. The third: can you go 30 days without drinking, starting now, without it feeling like a major sacrifice? If just considering it makes you uncomfortable, that discomfort is information about your current relationship with the substance. Do not use the results as a verdict. A high score does not define you. A low score does not guarantee you are fine. The point is not to label yourself. The point is to know with honesty where you are so you can decide from truth rather than from denial. I want to tell you about a debate few people know exists, and that has real implications for how sobriety is lived over the long term. It may be the most debated question in the field, and it is worth treating with the honesty it deserves. Is alcoholism an incurable disease, as Alcoholics Anonymous has said since 1939? Or is it a condition that can be healed and left behind? The argument for the disease model is solid. The addicted brain has real structural and functional changes. Genetics predispose. Relapses after long periods of sobriety do happen. Treating alcoholism as a disease has reduced moral stigma, which has been a civilizational advance. But there are serious critics who question that model. Mark Lewis, the neuroscientist, articulates it this way: saying, "I am an alcoholic for the rest of your life," even after decades without drinking, can keep a person defined by a condition they have already overcome. And here's a question worth thinking through slowly. Would you say I am a cancer patient 15 years after remission, completely healthy, with clean biopsies? No. You would say I had cancer. I am a survivor. I left it behind. The language of cancer allows the story to close. The language of Alcoholics Anonymous, by contrast, holds the condition in the present tense indefinitely. There is another important critique. Large-scale epidemiological data show that the majority of people who meet criteria for alcohol use disorder at some point in their lives resolve it without formal treatment, and many return to non-problematic drinking or stable abstinence. If it were truly incurable, this would be impossible. So, can you heal and leave it behind? The most honest answer based on the available evidence is probably yes for many people, though not for everyone. For people with mild or moderate problematic use, without deep underlying trauma, without heavy genetic loading, without structural neurological damage, it is plausible that after several years of stable sobriety, deep psychological work, and a reorganized life, the problem ceases to be a permanent vulnerability. The history is not erased, but it becomes history, like a broken leg that healed. There was an event, there is a scar, but the leg works normally. For people with severe disorder, documented physical dependence, psychiatric comorbidity, or multiple relapses following attempts at moderation, the conservative model of always in recovery remains the safer one. The asymmetry of cost and benefit matters. The cost of holding the identity of alcoholic in recovery for life is low if it effectively maintains sobriety. The cost of declaring oneself cured prematurely and relapsing can be catastrophic. The real question, then, is not which model is true. It is which model is useful for this person at this moment, and that can change across a lifetime. Someone may need the identity of alcoholic in the first 5 years and then release it with safety later. Another person may need it forever. Both paths are legitimate, depending on the clinical profile and on time. What matters is that you choose with honesty, in dialogue with a competent professional, not by rigid doctrine and not by contrarian fashion. There is a framework I want to give you now, and it is probably the most useful tool in this entire conversation. I call it the 5 layers of change. Every person who successfully stops drinking long-term works, consciously or unconsciously, on 5 layers simultaneously. People who relapse have almost always tended only to 1 or 2. The strength of the change depends on multi-layer integration. The first layer is the body, the chemical and cellular reality. If you have been drinking heavily and daily for years before anything else, speak to a physician. If you need it, there is supervised detoxification. If your sleep is damaged, it needs repair. If you have nutritional deficiencies, especially thiamine, magnesium, vitamin B12, they need correction. Tending only to the body produces fragile sobriety, vulnerable to the first emotional storm. But ignoring the body is skipping the foundation. The second layer is the mind, the cognitions and beliefs. The stories you tell yourself about alcohol. That it is real pleasure when in fact it is relief from the discomfort the previous drink created. That it is sophistication when in fact it is inertia. That it is friend when in fact it is trap. This is where books like Annie Grace's This Naked Mind, Alan Carr's Method, David Nutt's Drink, do their work. The idea is to read one fully without skipping chapters, without arguing with the book until the end, and allow your belief system to update. But changing beliefs alone is not enough. Without tending to the other layers, the new beliefs erode at the first major stress. The third layer is emotion, the wounds, and the regulation. What the alcohol was doing emotionally. Calming social anxiety, filling an existential emptiness, self-medicating untreated trauma, numbing boredom, regulating emotions you never learned to regulate any other way. Without tending to this layer, sobriety is fragile. The wounds that alcohol was concealing do not disappear because you stop drinking. They can even worsen at first because they no longer have the blanket. This is where deep psychotherapy does its work. If there is specific trauma, specialized treatment. If there is intense emotional dysregulation, dialectical behavior therapy. If there is deep social anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy. This layer is core. Without it, the rest collapses. The fourth layer is identity, who I am. The identities that were holding the consumption in place without you noticing. The sophisticated drinker who knows his wines. The relaxed father who deserves his beer. the mother who has earned her glass after a day with the children, the life of the party, the writer or artist because writers and artists drink. Every one of those identities is a story the brain has been living for years. It does not leave by decree, it leaves by substitution. New identities must be built with daily behavioral evidence. Do not declare you are someone who trains. Train, and in 6 months you will be. Identity follows, it does not precede. The fifth layer is environment and community. The external structures that surround the person. The house, where alcohol needs to stop being available, starting the first week, without negotiation. The partner with whom you need an honest conversation about what you need. Friends, some of whom were resting on the bar and will cool off. Work, where there may be cocktail culture and after-work pressure to reorganize. The groups you belong to, which can include a new one of support, whether Alcoholics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, or another. And the most underrated dimension of all, the group class with a fixed schedule, which we will talk about in a moment, because it may be the highest leverage intervention available. And here's the operating rule that I want you to remember. Change in a single layer is fragile. Change in 3 or more layers simultaneously is robust. Change in all 5 is practically irreversible. That is why people who only stop drinking, without touching the other layers, relapse so often. That is why AA works for many people. It touches emotion, identity, and community, layers 3, 4, and 5. That is why Carr's or Grace's method works for some. It touches mind and identity, layers 2 and 4. And that is why the most powerful combination, which we are about to explore, touches all 5 at once. The practical question for you is, which of the 5 layers are you investing in least? If you find 2 or more layers empty, that is probably the weak point of your plan. Relapse, when it happens, almost always comes through the unattended layers. Closing them before the storm arrives is the best investment you can make. Now, I want to tell you about a hypothesis that is probably the most practical piece of this whole conversation. I arrived at it by crossing several studies and observing what actually works in reality. And I believe it is among the most powerful approaches available for most people who want to change their relationship with alcohol. Here it is. Commit to a group exercise class every morning at 6. Fixed schedule. Companions who know you. A coach who expects you. Paid in advance. I know, it sounds like magazine advice. But stay with me because something deeper is happening than appears at first. You cannot drink late into the night and train hard at 6 in the morning. The very structure of the day makes the unwanted behavior costly. That is the first mechanism. It is called behavioral incompatibility. The somatic reality of the body the day after drinking becomes an immediate natural punishment, not an abstract one 10 years out. The body collects that same morning, and the collection is brutal. You don't have to summon willpower. Biology becomes your ally. The second mechanism is tribe substitution. The drinking community is replaced by the practicing community. Social belonging, one of the core functions alcohol was filling, is now covered without alcohol. The companions who see you 5 days a week sweating with you, that is a real tribe. It does not compare to bar friendships. The third mechanism is identity reconstruction. I am someone who trains every morning displaces I am someone who drinks. It is not about denying the previous identity, but building a new one with daily behavioral evidence. After 6 months, you are no longer trying to be someone who trains. You are someone who trains. That changes everything. The fourth mechanism is endogenous reward. Moderate to intense aerobic exercise releases dopamine in the same circuits alcohol activates, along with endorphins and endocannabinoids. The difference is that exercise dopamine is sustainable. It does not produce tolerance. It does not deregulate the set point. The brain learns it can reach reward without an external substance. The fifth mechanism is circadian repair. Alcohol fragments sleep. It destroys daily rhythms. A 6 a.m. class synchronizes the biological clock with light, exercise, food, and social contact, the 4 major time signals of the body, in a single hour. And the sixth mechanism, probably the most underrated, is behavioral pre-commitment. The monthly fee paid, the companions who expect you, the coach who knows you. The you of 10 p.m. cannot negotiate against the you of 6 a.m. because there are third parties involved. Behavioral economics has shown that the present self and future self have different preferences. The morning class binds the you of Monday morning from the you of Sunday afternoon. That is 6 mechanisms in a single daily decision. That is what makes it so efficient. Now, within morning group classes, there is one modality that has particular advantages for many profiles: boxing, recreational boxing, and it is worth knowing why. Boxing offers deep physical release. 30 minutes on the bag and pads exhaust you more than an hour of jogging. That is valuable in itself, but there is more. Many drinkers carry accumulated rage, frustration, aggression. They suppress socially. The bar was where that energy found an outlet, even if a toxic one. Boxing offers a legitimate outlet, socially acceptable, and on top of that, productive. The rage becomes fuel, not poison. Also, you cannot think while you box well. Technique, rhythm, breathing, coordination, all of it demands full presence. It is meditation in motion. For minds that cannot sit still, boxing is an accessible entrance into the meditative state. 30 minutes on the bag silences rumination more effectively than 30 minutes sitting trying to meditate. And there is something symbolic. Boxing connects with ancient traditions. It has gravitas, presence, codes. It is not just exercise. That matters because alcohol also offered something symbolically deep: belonging ritual, transition from work to home, mark of the end of the day. Replacing one ritual with another ritual works. Replacing a ritual with a merely healthy activity does not work the same. If boxing is not for you, there are alternatives with similar profile. Muay Thai, kickboxing, CrossFit, which shares the dense community and physical release, rowing, climbing, group trail running. The critical thing is not the exact modality. The critical thing is the combination. A class with a fixed schedule, a recurring community, a known instructor, enough intensity to produce real exhaustion, daily regularity. There is something else worth naming because it is happening right now and almost no one has articulated it. The transition from the after-work drinks to the after-work workout. In growing sectors, colleagues who used to go to the bar after the office now go to the gym together. Same function, decompress, connect, transition from work mode to home mode. But what is delivered is endorphins, a bond based on shared effort, better sleep, zero risk, zero financial impact. It is one of the most hopeful sociological shifts on the alcohol front happening right now. Whoever adopts it early wins twice, through their own sobriety and by modeling what will probably be the cultural norm of the next decade. Let us talk about the concrete moment when the desire appears. It is worth understanding from the inside because knowing its shape changes the subjective experience. Cravings have a predictable temporal structure. They begin with a trigger. It can be a time of day, a smell, an emotion, a person, a place. The trigger fires a cascade in less than a second. Then comes the rise, where the body activates, the thought accelerates, attention narrows toward the object. That rise lasts between 3 and 15 minutes. Then comes the peak, the moment when it feels infinite, as if it will last forever, as if only giving in could bring relief. The peak lasts between 5 and 20 minutes, and then, if you do not act, comes the descent. It almost always drops. The subjective intensity falls rapidly. The operational lesson changes the entire question. The question is not how do I eliminate this desire? The question is how do I get through the next 20 minutes without acting on it? 20 minutes are always survivable. Here is a simple 5-step protocol that works when you train it. When the desire arrives first, stop. Do nothing in the next 10 minutes. Do not argue with the desire. Do not justify yourself. Do not decide. Just do not act. 10 minutes of inaction are rarely regretted. Second, name what is happening. Out loud or in writing, say it. I am feeling a craving for alcohol right now. It started when I saw such a thing or felt such an emotion. My body feels this way. My mind is thinking this. The act of naming separates the observer from the observed. What is named stops being you. It becomes something you observe happening. That small distance is enormous. Third, breathe deliberately. 3 cycles of 4 seconds inhaling, 7 holding, 8 exhaling. This activates the parasympathetic system and brings the physiological activation of the craving down in less than 2 minutes. The chemistry of the body changes with the breath. It is not metaphor, it is physiology. Fourth, move the body. Walk 2 blocks. Do 20 squats. Take a cold shower. Physical movement changes the internal state faster than thought does. The chemistry of exercise competes directly with the chemistry of the craving. And fifth, call someone or do something meaningful. It does not need to be a deep conversation. A 5-minute call to someone you trust, writing a page in a journal, reading 5 pages of a book that matters to you. The important thing is to change mental lanes. Afterward, record the event. What triggered it? How long it lasted? What brought the intensity down? Each craving you survive without obeying is information that builds your personal map. And no less important, each one makes the next one easier. The brain is learning new routes. There is also a set of thoughts that appears again and again in the head of the drinker, trying to change. It is worth recognizing them by name, because recognition removes half their power. The first is all or nothing thinking. I already had one drink, what does the rest matter? It converts a slip into a weekend. The truth is that a slip is a slip, and a weekend is a decision. The second is the deserved permission. After the day I had, I earned this, as if alcohol were a medal and not a bill. The bill arrives the next day. The third is minimization. It's not that bad, everyone drinks. I am not an alcoholic. Possibly true and yet irrelevant. The question is not whether you are worse than others. The question is whether this is serving you. The fourth is downward comparison. Compared to my uncle, I barely drink. The standard is yourself, not someone else. The fifth is negative prediction. I won't enjoy dinner without wine. The prediction becomes self-fulfilling prophecy if you believe it. The sixth is the phrase that has caused more relapses than any other in human history. Just this once. If it were truly just this once, you wouldn't need to keep repeating it. And the seventh is the magical thinking of willpower. This time, I can really control it. If willpower alone were enough, it already would have been. Recognizing those 7 patterns in your own head, without arguing with them, just naming them, is one of the simplest and most powerful techniques that exists. The voice that says just one, the voice that says, I deserve this, the voice that says, this time I can, they are all the same voice dressed in different arguments. When you recognize it, it stops being your voice. It becomes a voice you hear, and to which you can respond with something simple. Not today. Let's talk about social situations because that's where many people fall, even with the best of intentions. The second leading cause of early relapse after emotional state is unmanaged social pressure. Having prefabricated responses prevents you from having to improvise under fire. I want to give you concrete tools. When someone asks you why you are not drinking, you have several options, and it is worth having several ready. The short and firm version. Not today, thanks. The casual version. I'm training for something, I've got the gym tomorrow morning. The health version. My doctor asked me to take a break. The honest version. I decided to stop for a while, it's been good for me. The spiritual version. I'm on a personal retreat. This one stretches indefinitely. And the humor version, which I think is worth having. I drank ahead this year, I'm running early. Or this one. I have to train tomorrow morning. People respect someone who trains more than someone who delivers a sermon about health. When they insist, and they will insist, twice is courtesy, 3 times is aggression. On the 3rd time, you can move from courtesy to firmness. I said no, thanks. Without an apologetic smile. Without justification. People who insist 3 times are almost always managing their own discomfort with your sobriety, not yours. And here is the most important rule, the one I want you to remember. You do not owe anyone an explanation for why you are not drinking. It is not public information. The question is socially inappropriate. It is only because alcohol is so culturally normalized that the question has become acceptable. Your answer can be as short as you want. For your partner, if they keep drinking, an honest and specific conversation helps. Something like, "This is something I need to do for myself. I am not asking you to change. I am asking you to support me in my change." Specifically, what would help is for you not to offer me a drink when I get home from work. Specific requests work. Support me is vague and almost impossible to fulfill. Don't offer me a drink when I get home is actionable. For children, especially adolescents, the truth works better than silence. I decided to stop drinking because it makes me a better father, a better partner, and because taking care of myself is also teaching you to take care of yourselves, without a moral lesson directed at them, without threats, just the model. Teenagers detect moralizing from kilometers away and reject it. They detect modeling, and without admitting it, they absorb it. For colleagues at work, the simplest is best. "I'm on a personal health project." Closes the conversation, the least of your concerns. There is another question worth asking. Why is substitution easier than quitting? The drink fulfills several functions simultaneously: ritual, occupation of the hands, social marker that says I am also participating, complex flavor, freshness. If you only try to remove the drink, all those functions go empty at the same time. That is a lot. But if you substitute, the functions stay covered with something else. Refreshing and simple alternatives: sparkling water with lime over ice, water with fresh grated ginger, unsweetened iced tea, kombucha, hibiscus tea, fermented pineapple drinks. To feel adult at an event: 0% beer, 0% wine, tonic with lime and fresh herbs in a balloon glass, alcohol-free Negroni with zero vermouth and alcohol-free bitter. 10 years ago, this was difficult. Today, the options are wide and the quality is rising. For celebrations: alcohol-free champagne, mocktails with shrubs, herbal syrups, fresh citrus, sangria without alcohol with fruit and spices, warm options for the night, tea with ginger and honey, specialty coffee after meals, rooibos tea, hot chocolate without sugar. An important note: drinks like zero beer and zero wine are useful tools in transition, but some people in long-term recovery recommend avoiding them because they preserve the ritual and the flavor, which for some profiles can trigger desire. For others, they are the key piece. Each person needs to test and observe honestly. And here are 10 concrete tips for not drinking at parties and events, because parties are where much is decided. First, arrive with your own drink in hand. Having your bottle of sparkling water or kombucha from the door eliminates the dynamic of "what can I get you?" You are self-sufficient from minute one. Second, pour your own first before anyone pours for you. If you arrive at someone's home, go directly to the kitchen and pour sparkling water with lime in an elegant glass. That is your drink for the evening. No one notices the difference if the glass is right. Third, have a short, firm response ready. "Not today, thanks," without justifying. The long explanation invites more questions. Fourth, change the center of your activity at the event. Instead of staying near the bar, get on the dance floor, at the food table, in conversation with someone you actually want to know. Physical geography decides more than willpower. Fifth, arrive late and leave early. The first 2 hours are usually the social and pleasant ones. After that, the dynamic shifts. Arriving at 9, leaving at 11:30, gives you the best part of the event without the toxic hours. Sixth, identify an ally. If you go with a partner, friend, or colleague, someone who knows you are not drinking, having a person who knows your commitment substantially reduces the probability of yielding. Seventh, schedule a post-event activity. End the night with something positive: a hot bath, reading, a conversation with someone you love. Parties are not the end of the day. The end of the day is what you choose. Eighth, if you feel you are in the risk zone, leave without asking permission. Your sobriety overrides your social courtesy. Message the host the next day. No one is going to remember that you left at 10:30. You are going to remember having resisted. Ninth, identify the glass your body associates with elegance. If it was the balloon glass with tonic, bring that glass. If it was the flute with champagne, request something in a flute. The brain asks for ritual before substance. 10th, write the experience when you return. 10 minutes before sleep. How did I leave? What was hard? What was easier than I expected? Each sober event you survive is information that trains your system. After 15 events like this, parties stop being an obstacle and become opportunities. There is something almost no one tells you, and that is worth knowing. Alcohol fulfills in the lives of many people the function of reward at the end of the day or reward for an accomplishment. If you stop drinking without substituting that function, there will be a hole. And the hole is where relapse enters. That is why it is worth consciously designing alternative rewards, better than the drink, and new rituals that fill the space. The best rewards money can buy are not material in the usual sense. An hour of professional massage releases oxytocin, serotonin, reduces cortisol. The effect is greater than several drinks, and the next day there is no bill. A session of sauna alternated with cold plunge produces deep, ritualized, intense endorphin release. 3 cycles of dry sauna at 80 degrees followed by immersion in cold water at 10 degrees leave the body in a state of well-being, comparable to a good glass of wine, without the consequences. Other physical rewards: a new bed, new sheets, a quality pillow, direct investments in your deep sleep. Sessions of physical therapy, acupuncture, especially if you carry background anxiety. An hour of floating in salt water at body temperature in darkness and silence, which produces a meditative state accessible even for those who cannot sit and meditate. Sensory rewards: a special dinner well made at home, with good ingredients, eaten without distraction. Top quality chocolate in small portions, ritually. Specialty coffee, it's worth investing in excellent beans. Quality tea, rooibos, matcha, oolong, ritualized. Experience rewards: concerts, theater, opera, quality cinema. Substitute a bar night with a cultural night once a month. Short trips, a weekend away twice a year. Intentional purchases, something good you wanted. Course, workshop, retreat, investment in something you learn. The satisfaction of learning something new is one of the most sustainable human pleasures. Relational rewards: quality time with people who matter. A dinner with a dear friend without screens and without rush. A long phone call with a family member you love. An outing with a child if you have one. A walk, a coffee, a conversation without distractions. And the nearly extinct but deeply nourishing practice of writing letters by hand to someone who does not expect a letter. Spiritual rewards: a silent retreat, even just one day. Deep time in nature: a long walk in the mountains, the sea, a river. Intentional contemplative practice. An hour of prayer, meditation, or sacred reading. Service: a morning helping with something important. A food bank, a shelter, a companion in need. Service produces a kind of well-being that no self-focused pleasure produces. It is worth knowing. Here is the substitution math, worth listening to closely. If you spent $200 a week on alcohol, that is $10,400 a year. That finances a weekly massage, a monthly special dinner, a quarterly short trip, an annual retreat, and still leaves a surplus. Sobriety is not a renunciation of pleasure. It is a redistribution of budget toward better pleasures. And here is the operating principle. Every time you catch yourself thinking, "I deserve a drink," the correct question is not, "Do I really deserve it?" The correct question is, what alternative pleasure, better than the drink, could I give myself right now? Designing your own personal list of alternative rewards is one of the most useful exercises of early sobriety. And after 6 months, you realize that the list of real pleasures superior to alcohol is very long, and the list of things alcohol did better than the alternatives is practically nothing. I want to talk to you about a myth that has many people trapped, and that deserves to be dismantled. The myth of the tortured artist. The idea that suffering, depression, addiction are necessary fuels of creativity. Hemingway with his daiquiri, Bukowski with his beer, Hunter S. Thompson with everything, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Amy Winehouse. The cultural mythology of the genius who needs to burn. The data do not support it. Stephen King, after 40 years sober, has written approximately 40 additional books. His production after stopping drinking in quantity and quality far exceeds the production of the drunk king, and he himself says it bluntly. The myth of the alcoholic artist is one of the great pop intellectual myths of our time, and the truth is that the substance eats creativity, it does not feed it. Why does the myth persist? For several reasons, all examinable. First, selective survivors. We remember Hemingway because he wrote The Old Man and the Sea. We do not remember the thousands of aspirants who also drank, but never wrote anything because drinking consumed them before they could. The survival bias is massive. Second, causal confusion. Some artists are addicts because they have traits, sensitivity, emotional intensity, search for experience, that correlate both with creativity and with vulnerability to addiction. Addiction does not cause creativity. The two share a root. Third, cultural romanticization. The publishing and music industries sold the mythology of the tormented genius because it sells. That genius ends up paying for it with their life. Fourth, justification of consumption. For someone who already drinks heavily, the idea I need to drink to create is a perfect rationalization. It converts the problem into a tool. The truth of sustained creativity is different. Prolific creators over the long term, not the ones who made one masterpiece and disappeared, share patterns very different from those of the tormented artist. Daily discipline. Stephen King writes 2,000 words a day. Protected sleep. REM sleep is crucial for creative consolidation, and alcohol destroys it. Sustained energy. Creating requires mental, physical, and emotional energy, and alcohol drains all three. Cognitive clarity. Revision, editing, refining, which is where the quality is actually made, require a lucid mind. The first draft can come out drunk. The published book cannot. And a regulated emotional life. Not suppressed, regulated. The artist who drowns in their emotions does not produce. The one who regulates them can turn them into work. If you have been believing I need to drink to create, there is a simple experiment. 30 days without alcohol while trying to create. Measure your output quantitatively and qualitatively. Almost always, production rises substantially. And for every visible Hemingway, there are 10 prolific, sober creators less celebrated, but more productive. Cormac McCarthy, Jonathan Franzen, Sarah Silverman, sober. Jerry Seinfeld does not drink. David Lynch has not drunk in decades and meditates twice a day. Sobriety does not self-promote, which creates a statistical illusion. And here is an observation worth keeping. Your emotional sensitivity, your depth, your capacity to see the world are yours. They did not come from the glass. They were there before. They will be there after. The everyday version of the creative myth, for many people, is not about art, but about social identity. I am boring sober. I don't have a good time without drinking. I don't know what to say without a few. The logical trap is the same. If they take the drink away for a week, the first party will feel strange, which seems to confirm the belief. What is really happening is that you are recalibrating your nervous system and your social repertoire. Sober social ability is trained exactly like an athletic ability, except that the first 5 or 10 occasions will be uncomfortable. It is a transition period, not a permanent sentence. Identify what made you fun before alcohol. Did you joke? Did you dance? Did you talk about a certain topic with passion? That person is still there, just inhibited. Bring a prepared story. If silence makes you anxious, having an anecdote ready for the first minutes lowers social activation. Move the body. Dance, play, walk while you talk. Forced stillness uncomfortable for the early sober. Movement dissolves it, and give yourself 2 years. Mature sober social identity does not get built in 3 months. After 2 years, the person discovers they are more fun sober than drunk because they are more present, more responsive, more connected. And now, after this entire journey, we arrive at the question that matters more than any other. The question that changes everything? Almost every book about sobriety ends by talking about what is avoided. The cirrhosis avoided, the accidents that did not happen, the relationships that did not break, the crises that did not arrive. And that is true and worth knowing. But it is not the complete truth, and it is probably not the most important part. The deeper truth, the one rarely told, is what appears when alcohol stops taking up space. Life has a quiet abundance that you only discover when you stop covering it. The rest of this narration is about that abundance. Throughout this conversation, without naming it that way, we have been moving within terrain defined by a dominant cultural question. What do I lose if I stop drinking? That is the question the industry wants you to ask because the answer seems obvious and costly. I lose the fun. I lose my friends. I lose the Friday ritual. I lose the taste of wine with dinner. I lose the one thing that helped me relax. That question is the trap. Not because it's false, but because it's incomplete. It defines the game in terms of loss, and defined that way, the loss will always seem greater than the gain, because the loss is concrete and known and the gain is abstract and future. But there is another question. What appears when alcohol stops being there? That is the question almost no one asks, because the culture did not teach us to ask it. And yet, it is the true question. What appears is not the absence of something. It is the presence of many things that were hidden underneath. I will try to name them, one by one, not as argument to convince you, but as invitation to see them. Begin with the morning because it is the first, and because it is the most universal. The mornings of the drinker are negotiated territory. There is a weight upon waking, an echo of the night, a reluctance to open the eyes. The head is not light at all. The mouth tastes of something. The stomach is not at peace. Even when the night was moderate, even when there was no obvious hangover, there is a subterranean cost. The body dedicates the first 3 or 4 hours of the day to processing what was ingested, not to starting the day. And then, after a few weeks without alcohol, something new begins. You wake before the alarm. The body is ready. The mind is clear. You leave the bed without fighting the bed. You make your coffee or tea with presence, not with urgency. You look out the window. The morning light has a quality you had forgotten. You realize almost with surprise that you are content for no specific reason, just from being awake in the morning. The first 3 hours of the day become the best 3 hours of the day. Where before there was a recovery zone, now there is the zone of greatest lucidity, greatest energy, greatest readiness. The productive people of the world, those who write books and start companies and paint and raise their children well, almost all of them protect their mornings as their most valuable resource. The drinker cannot protect them because they are already committed to processing the previous night. Reclaiming the mornings is not a side benefit. It is probably the most concrete and most underrated change of sobriety. Whoever reclaims the mornings reclaims, literally, a quarter of their useful life. The second thing that returns is continuous memory. The drinker does not always notice, but their biography has gaps. Small ones sometimes, large ones other times. Conversations they finished but cannot recall how. Jokes they told and do not know whether they landed. Promises made they do not remember making. Decisions taken in altered states that they later have to investigate like detectives of their own life. Continuous memory is one of the most underrated pleasures of human existence. Waking up and remembering the whole night without gaps, without having to reconstruct, without having to ask someone what happened after a certain point. Reaching Monday and remembering Saturday and Sunday in full. Turning 40 and being able to look back and see a continuous reel, not a collection of fragments. Sobriety reconstructs that reel. The weeks become whole. The months take shape. The years feel intact. Your life returns to you exactly as it was, without parts edited courtesy of the alcohol. At first, that frightens a little because what also returns are things the alcohol was helping to forget. But after some months, what was frightening becomes liberating. Your life is yours again. You did not inherit it to the substance. The third thing is time returning. It is hard to believe until you live it, but it is real. Time expands. People who have been sober for a year when they look back almost always say the same thing. This year felt like two. The weeks held more. The weekends were long. The trips contained more experience per day. The conversations had more substance. It is not magic, it is simple math. If a drinking night produces 8 hours of low quality, the night itself, the broken sleep, the slow morning, and that happened 2 or 3 times a week, then you were operating at 100% only 4 days a week. Sobriety takes you to 100% 7 days a week. The difference, accumulated over a year, is enormous. It translates into more books read, more trips taken, more projects finished, more real conversations, more time with the people you love, more things learned. People report having learned languages, finished degrees, written books, started businesses in their first year without alcohol. It is not that they became extraordinary. It is that they simply had available the hours they did not have available before. Sobriety does not add years to your life. It adds life to your years in a literal and measurable sense. The fourth is the body returning. Your body has been trying to tell you something for years. Sobriety allows it to speak. At 90 days, you will look in the mirror and notice that your face is different, less swollen, especially around the eyes. Smoother skin, whiter eyes, clearer. Weight, almost effortlessly, has dropped between 5 and 10 kilos. People who do not know you stopped drinking will ask what you are doing differently, but the visible change is the least of it. What matters is what you feel inside. Resting heart rate dropped, blood pressure normalized, deep sleep increased, joints hurt less, digestion works. Libido returns, in most cases with more strength than you had before. Energy after lunch does not crash the way it crashed. Climbing stairs does not wind you the same. And then your body is the house where you will live the rest of your years. Treating it as an ethanol warehouse is a decision with cumulative price. Treating it as an ally has cumulative returns, and the returns on a well-treated body keep paying out until the last day. The fifth is the mind that clears. There is a fog the drinker carries without knowing they carry it. They discover it only when it dissipates. At 6 months sober, most people report a mental clarity they did not remember having. It is not new brilliance, it is the original mind, the one that came with you at birth, without the accumulated layer of ethanol. Readings that were difficult before now flow. Complex conversations are followed without effort. Ideas connect to other ideas. Short-term memory, weakened during years of drinking, recovers noticeably. For creators, professionals, students, parents who want to be fully present, this change is probably the most valuable. The mind that clears becomes available for everything that matters. And along with the mind, real creativity returns. Not the feverish inspiration of consumption, that brilliant idea you had at 2 a.m. and forgot by 9. But sustained creativity, the kind that produces. The kind that sits in the morning, works for 2 hours, and produces something finished. The sixth is the whole emotions. Alcohol anesthetizes. That is much of its appeal, but it anesthetizes indistinctly. You cannot mute sadness without also muting joy. You cannot mute anxiety without also muting presence. The chronic drinker lives with compressed emotional range, without high highs, without low lows, a gray middle band without much texture. Sobriety returns the whole range. At first that is hard. The first raw sadnesses, the first anxieties without buffer, the first angers that do not drown. You have to learn to navigate them. But along with those come the unfiltered joys. The laugh that comes from the stomach. The emotion of a perfect moment without knowing why. The love felt with the whole body. The gratitude that arrives without reason. It is worth the cost. To live the full range is to live more, to live truly. What alcohol was selling as relief from pain was actually a reduction of overall volume. Life at reduced volume is diminished life. Life at full volume, including the hard parts, is complete life. The seventh is real relationships. The friendships of the drinker often rest on the bar. When the bar disappears, they discover which were real friendships and which were associations of shared consumption. At first, that feels like loss. Some friendships cool, but after a few months, what remains is more nourishing than what was there before. The conversations with those who stay are deeper, not more shallow. Intimacy becomes possible because both people are whole at the table, not halved. And new bonds appear, people who would not have approached before because your world was built around consumption. Gym community, retreat companions, prayer or meditation friends, people who have also stopped drinking. The social network reorganizes, and the new version is denser, more reliable, more real. For those with partners, the change is probably the deepest. If your partner also stops, the marriage can flourish in ways that seem almost improbable. Sober intimacy, sober conversation, sober closeness are qualitatively different. If your partner keeps drinking, the road is more complicated but also clarifying. The relationship either deepens with the new version of you or it reveals itself as less solid than it seemed. For those with children, sobriety is one of the greatest gifts you can give them. Not the abstract gift of not being an alcoholic parent, the concrete gift of being present, of remembering yesterday's conversation, of playing with real energy, of being the stable and available person they deserve. The eighth is the possibilities that open. There is something that happens with money, and it is worth naming without shyness. If you were spending $2,000 a year on alcohol, that is $40,000 over 20 years without counting investment. Invested at 7% annually, it is approximately $85,000. If you were spending $5,000 a year, it is over $200,000 invested. That is not a side benefit. That is early retirement. That is the children's education paid. That is trips taken. That is real financial freedom. But even more important than the accumulated money are the possibilities that open. A sober person with $2,000 extra a year can start a project, can pay for therapy, which will probably produce more changes in their life than any other investment, can pay for courses, formative travel, retreats, equipment for a new craft. Sobriety does not produce only savings. It produces capital applicable to whoever you want to become. The same with energy. The person who wakes with energy at 7 in the morning still has energy at 7 in the evening after work. That spare energy is what builds personal projects. The second book, the side business, the master's degree, the sport you wanted to take up again. The drinker did not have that spare energy. All of it went to basic functioning. The sober person has it, and it accumulates over the years in concrete forms. The ninth is self-respect that gets built. There is a specific pleasure alcohol can never give. It is the pleasure of keeping a promise you made to yourself. Each day without drinking is a promise kept to yourself. Small at first, almost invisible. But days add to days, weeks add, months add. At 6 months, you realize you have been keeping a hard promise, every day for 6 months. And that changes something deep in how you see yourself. The chronic drinker lives with a silent deficit of self-respect. Every time they promised this time for real and did not keep it, they left a small trace. Those traces accumulate. After years, there is a layer of unkept promises to oneself that weighs. The person sees themselves as someone whose word is not entirely reliable, not even to themselves. Sobriety reverses that flow. Each day kept is a vote for your own reliability. After a year, the person living that year begins to trust themselves differently. They begin to dare to keep other hard promises because they now have internal evidence that they can. Sobriety does not only change the relationship with alcohol, it changes the relationship with yourself. And out of that come other transformations that were not in the original plan. And we arrive at the 10th, the hardest to name and the most important. There is a person who was covered, your true self, beneath the layers of consumption, culture, and habit. Sobriety does not invent that person. It discovers them, it reveals them, it frees them. You will realize over time that many things you believed were your personality were in fact effects of consumption. The morning irritability was not your character, it was the hangover. The vague Sunday sadness was not your temperament, it was withdrawal. The social anxiety was not your nature, it was the rebound from weekend drinking. The impatience with the children was not your limit, it was exhaustion from broken sleep. The difficulty concentrating was not your capacity, it was brain inflammation. When all of that leaves, someone remains. And that someone is usually, in the experience of those who go through this process with honesty, better than expected, more capable, more kind, more interesting, more present. You had been living a diminished version of yourself for years without knowing it was a diminished version. And here, right here, is the point most books about sobriety do not dare to make. It is worth making with every letter. That person who remains is not just a functional version of you. It is you with access to the ceiling of your possibilities, and the ceiling of your possibilities is probably much higher than you have ever imagined. Sobriety is not only the absence of a problem, it is the condition of possibility for human projects that with alcohol were literally blocked. Some of those projects are among the highest a human being can aspire to. They are worth naming one by one, not as a promise that you will reach them automatically, but as an invitation to see what is truly at stake. The serious athlete. If there is a part of you that ever felt the attraction of the trained body, of physical performance, of the organism at its maximum capacity, that was a real calling. Sobriety makes it possible. Cristiano Ronaldo has barely drunk a drop in his entire career. Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls drinking almost nothing. Novak Djokovic does not drink alcohol at all. This is not coincidence. Athletic excellence requires recovery, deep sleep, hormonal regulation, all things alcohol destroys systematically. If you ever wanted to be a serious athlete, sobriety is the first condition. And you are 40, 50, 60 years old, it does not matter. There are people who started training seriously in their 40s and built bodies and capacities that would astonish their 20-year-old selves. The human body responds to good input throughout the entire life. If you stopped believing your body could become strong again, that belief probably came from the alcohol. The great thinker. If there is a part of you that always wanted to write something important, to read deeply, to truly think about things that matter, and to leave an intellectual mark of some kind, that part was blocked by the fog of alcohol. The clear mind that emerges after 6 months of sobriety is the tool without which serious thinking is not possible. The great contemporary thinkers whose work you admire probably do not consume alcohol significantly. Yuval Harari practices 2 months of total silent meditation a year and consumes minimally. David Lynch has not drunk in decades and meditates twice a day. Almost everyone who has produced sustained mental work in recent decades follows a similar pattern. If there is a book you wanted to write, an idea you wanted to develop, an intellectual contribution you wanted to make, sobriety is the first step, not the last. Inspiration does not come from the glass. It comes from the trained, rested mind that alcohol specifically prevents. The monk, the contemplative, the serious seeker. If there is a part of you that always sensed the spiritual dimension is real, that there is something deeper than ordinary life, that prayer or meditation or contemplation offers something important. Know this. No serious practitioner of any contemplative tradition, in any religion, can do that work drinking. Benedictine monks drink wine with moderation, but consider drunkenness incompatible with the spiritual life. Zen masters prescribed total sobriety. The Desert Fathers were radically abstinent. Sufi, Catholic, Jewish, Hindu mystics all agree on one thing. The consciousness that seeks the transcendent requires clarity. Alcohol blocks precisely the inner subtlety that contemplative practice cultivates. If you want to go deep in prayer, in meditation, in serious spiritual practice, sobriety is the first door. And what lies on the other side of that door, the testimonies agree across centuries and traditions, is worth infinitely more than any glass ever poured. The Great Father, the Great Mother. If you have children, this is direct. Your child does not need a perfect father, but they need a present one. That is the greatest gift a parent can give. Being there, awake, conscious, lucid, patient, available. The father who arrives tired and pours the drink to decompress before playing with his children is giving them a diminished version. They notice, even if minimally, even if they love him completely. The difference between the present father and the present but half anesthetized father accumulates throughout the childhood of the children in ways that later are very difficult to correct. Sobriety lets you be the complete parent, not the Instagram parent, not the perfect parent, the real parent, awake, available. Your children deserve that, and you have the capacity to give it. It is one of the most important decisions you will make in your life as a parent, and almost no one names it as a parenting decision. It is. Sobriety is a parenting decision before it is a health decision. The great partner. If you have a partner or want one, sobriety changes the possibilities deeply. Real intimacy, conversation that deepens over the years, physical closeness that improves with time instead of fading, accumulated trust that comes from keeping promises day after day, all of it requires presence. Alcohol is a veil between you and the other person. When the veil is removed, there is initial discomfort because you have to learn to be entirely with someone without buffer. But after that, there is the possibility of a kind of relationship the chronic drinker never gets to know. There are sober marriages of 30 years still flourishing, where both partners continue to discover each other with more depth every year. That is available. It is not the property of a few lucky privileged ones. It is available to any couple that decides to look at each other without filter and build with presence. The great artist, the serious creator. If there is a part of you that creates, that produces, that has a body of work inside, that part was hurt by the mythology of the tortured artist we already dismantled. Stephen King wrote 40 books after he stopped drinking, against the few he produced during his intense years of consumption. Cormac McCarthy produced without drinking. Marie Kondo, Jonathan Franzen, the prolific creators sustained over long careers, almost always did it from sobriety or minimal consumption. Creative intuition requires REM sleep. Revision requires lucidity. Daily consistency requires sustained energy. Alcohol kills all three. If you have a body of work inside, what you need to do is not wait for bohemian inspiration. It is to build the conditions for the work to emerge. Sobriety is the first condition. Daily discipline is the second. Patience over years is the third. The three together produce work. Without the first, the other two are not possible. The one who serves others. If there is a part of you that wants to help, to build something larger than your own life, to leave the world a little better than you found it, know this. The capacity for sustained service depends on personal integrity. The person internally fragmented by consumption can help in spurts but cannot sustain a life of service. The person in mature sobriety has the capacity to be there for others in a sustained way. This can take large forms, founding an organization, dedicating your life to a cause, or small but equally important forms, being the stable adult in a complicated family, the reliable friend in a circle, the professional who actually does their work with care, the neighbor who shows up when someone needs them. Sustained service requires what sobriety builds, and sustained service is probably the most reliable source of life meaning available to a human being. What I have just named is not a promise that stopping drinking will automatically turn you into any of those. Sobriety is a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. But the condition is real and absolute. Without sobriety, none of these high projects are sustainably reachable. With sobriety, all of them are in play, depending on what you do with the hours, the energy, and the clarity you reclaim. The invitation, then, is this. Do not aim to be a simply functional version of yourself. Aim to be the highest version of yourself the conditions allow. And the conditions, after sobriety, allow much more than most people imagine. The ceiling is almost never known by the one who keeps drinking, because alcohol sets a very low floor and the days are spent maintaining that floor. Without alcohol, the floor rises, the hours return, the energy accumulates, and the ceiling begins to be visible from below for the first time in life. Look up. What gets built from sustained sobriety over 5, 10, 20 years does not resemble the average life. It resembles the lives we admire, those of people who seem to have something special. Almost always, what they had was this: internal conditions that allowed them to operate at the maximum of their human capacity, day after day for decades. Not different genetics, not different luck, not different privilege. Different internal conditions. And those conditions anyone can begin building today. That is available to you too. The door is open. The only thing it asks for entry is the decision to no longer carry the substance that was keeping it closed. To know the person you are without that layer and to let them become what they can become is probably the most enriching experience available to a human being who decides to examine their relationship with alcohol with honesty. There is an experiment worth doing before anything else. Give sobriety 90 real days, not as a test to return, as an honest exploration of what appears when alcohol stops being there. If after 90 days with a clear mind, a rested body, recovered mornings, more real relationships, you want to return to drinking, you will make that decision from a position of strength and knowledge, not from impulse. And it will be your real decision, not the decision the culture made for you decades ago. But most people, after 90 days, do not want to return. And those who do return almost always return differently, with a different relationship, with a different consciousness. Almost no one goes back to the previous pattern. Once the abundance is seen, it does not unsee. What is on the other side is not the loss of your only entertainment. It is the discovery that you had many entertainments waiting for you, hidden beneath the only one you were sold as entertainment. They are waiting. The mornings, the long weeks, the body that returns, the mind that clears, the whole emotions, the real relationships, the money that becomes possibility, the self-respect that builds, and at the end of everything, yourself. Yourself, without the layer that was modifying everything. And above all, the version of you that you do not yet know, the high version, the one that can train as an athlete, think as a thinker, contemplate as a seeker, love as a partner, raise as a parent, create as an artist, serve as one who serves. All of that is on the other side of a decision. The decision is yours and no one can make it for you. But now you know what is on the other side. And that was the missing piece. Don't settle for not sinking. Aim to take off.